All right, we're going to get started. Cool, so we're going to be talking about master plan communities. So master plan communities are playing an increasingly important role in actually fulfilling housing demand right now, because as many of you know, the existing home market is super tight. So a lot of people feel like maybe they can't find value in the house they can find right now, or they just simply can't get a house they can afford. So that's pushing a lot of people into new home sales. And new homes are actually, the sale of new homes actually that went up 11.8% or something like that in April. And a lot of those new homes are, of course, in master plan communities. So this is an important way that we're fulfilling the housing demand. But then at the same time, living in a master plan community, you kind of need a car, you kind of need to drive around sometimes in and out. And also just the process of building a new house is, has its own carbon footprint. So people that design and develop master plan communities are trying to figure out, like, how do we go about doing this sustainably? How do we address affordability issues? And they're doing a lot with trying to actually make master plan communities cool places to live and not just like a boring place. So we're going to be talking with these three awesome experts today. We'll talk about how demographic shifts and migration patterns are changing these communities. We'll talk about remote work and how that's changing how people interact with master plan communities. And we'll get a little bit into some goats and how they're helping with the tree management and the community in Texas. So to start out, we'll just have each of the panels introduce themselves. And do you want to start, Robert?
Sure. My name is Robert Pilgrim. I'm Director of Planning with TPG Partners. We are a 36-year-old firm in Texas. We have offices in Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston. And we'll get into some questions now.
Hello, I'm John Saxon. I'm Chief of Staff for the Howard Hughes Corporation. Howard Hughes, we're a publicly traded real estate development company, and we own and develop master plan communities all across the country, and excited to be here today.
Hi, everybody. Nate Cherry. I'm the Regional Director of the city's studio for Gensler, based in Los Angeles. And I guess broadly defined, I work in master plan communities. I do a lot of work around innovation districts or communities that have a very large employment anchor. Done quite a bit of work for the Irvine Company, a number of Sunbelt baseball teams who shall remain nameless, but I can talk about abstractly, some hockey teams. I've done some work for Manchester City, the football team, and then also some nanochip manufacturers in Phoenix who are also building a new community around that major employer. So I guess from the other side, I do master plan communities with usually a very large anchor use, which is not residential.
So I wanted to start with I kind of alluded to it earlier, but this question about walkability. We see a lot of, in both mixed-use project, commercial and residential, this desire for more walkable spaces, more pedestrian spaces, but at the same time, a lot of these master plan communities are not connected to public transportation. You sort of need a car to live there. So how do you go about, when you're thinking about these communities, how do you go about designing around walkability while also keeping the car in mind?
So it's an interesting topic today, and I think that walkability enhances the vibrancy of the community. It connects it, and really, at Howard Hughes, what we try to do, as far as development goes, is to create a place where people can have this live, work, play environment. They can do everything they want to do all in one cohesive location. So walkability, having amenities throughout the community, integrated in strategic locations. So having your retail and having tenants that are where a consumer can have an experience, while at the same time having that office, a stone's throw away, and then finishing the day and going back to your home, all in one place is really what it's all about. And Marissa, you mentioned having a car, but still having the walkability. I think that what we've seen today is commutes play a big part in all of this. And coming back into the office, and the average commute in America is just under an hour. But in the Woodlands, which is one of the communities that we developed at Hughes, that commutes 7 minutes. And so what we've seen is more activity, where people want to get out, they want to go back into the office, they want to go grab lunch with a colleague or with their family during the day. And then during the weekend, when you have all of these offerings, these commercial offerings, the whole community is activated to where at a point during the week it's full, and on the weekends it's full. So you have a full 7-day activation where people want to be.
And we're making every attempt to organize that, those activities, that amenity-rich community around the open space or around the natural features of the community. Sometimes they're natural features that are created by humans. We have in one of our projects in North Texas, there is a gas line that runs through the property. And we took the homes, instead of traditionally backing those homes to that gas line, we fronted it with a boulevard on either side of it and made it a several-mile-long walkway. So we took something that would have been seen as a liability and made it into an amenity within the community.
What community is that?
That is in Winsong in North Texas.
So you can actually see the gas line? Or?
Well, you can see a long green belt,
Okay.
but you don't see that there is something below the ground there that you can't plant a tree on.
There's another community that's getting planned outside of Houston where they're actually experimenting with car-free zones. But that was really interesting. Like they want to be able to have walkability within a community. It's pretty far away from Houston and Richmond, so you probably still need a car. But at least when you're there, you can walk around. I think, John, didn't you say your commute is like 5 minutes?
Yeah, by foot, not by car.
Yeah, so John lives in this cool community in Texas called the Woodlands, where Howard Hughes is headquartered, so he gets to walk to work. I still don't get to do that yet, but yeah, I guess, like, how do you, I mean, that brings us to another point, which is, we've seen an increase in demand for green spaces and this desire for more sustainability, but as Nate, I know you mentioned this when we were talking earlier, new home construction is such a contributor to climate change. So how do you go about kind of balancing, thinking about sustainable design and reducing carbon footprint in master plan communities, while also realizing just the reality of construction as a major contributor?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the projects that I work on are in the inner ring of urban centers, and so just by definition, they tend to use a lot of resources that are already there, whether that's road connections or bike connections that are already there, or transit. And the projects that we focus on tend to have a tremendous amount of shared investment, public-private partnerships, institutional investments, and that sort of thing. So that means a lot of partners have a lot of skin in the game in order to make the communities work as effectively and efficiently as they possibly can. But the number one thing in terms of carbon footprint, I think that we can do is really focus on human behavior. And it's one thing to create walkable trails and places to eat next to a super amenity and that sort of thing. But something that I learned from the Irvine Company, and we try to apply with all our projects, is what they call affinity hubs. And so those are areas where there's shared interest, where people don't necessarily perceive a shared interest. So those can be around wellness or tech and science or design and culture or food production or even creativity. So, for example, the single nurse and the researcher on gerontology and the active empty nester all actually share quite a lot of interests. And those those groups can be brought together through activities. And so the ultimate goal or the ultimate opportunity that we can learn from more established communities is how to focus on behaviors so that people are spending more time walking and connecting and less time driving and being on their own. So the holy grail is behavior, I would say.
And the way we try to approach that and reinforce that with a more of a greenfield master plan community is to really think of that as a nodal development. So that if transit ever can or does reach out to those communities, it might be the greenfield development that's far out in the suburbs, that it is at a place, it's connecting to a place that is very walkable and connected. But so many of those communities, we're finding that with the 5-day work week pivoting to more of a 3-day work week, that there's those opportunities for amenity-rich communities to include things like a WeWork type of facility within the amenity centers. We have that's been very successful at Pecan Square in North Fort Worth. And that's also a project where we really try to lean into some preservation of some trees on that project. There's over 200 pecan trees that were saved and created sort of an experience as you enter the community with a long green within that community. And then there's a lot of other amenity assets that help to give you a reason to sort of park your car on the weekend when you arrive, and maybe you don't crank it back up till Tuesday when you go back into your office.
Yeah, and that brings us to another point, which is, the reality is that most office workers are in some kind of a hybrid scenario, which means that they're in their house more. And I've been hearing, I don't know of the other reporters have been hearing this, but I've been hearing from retailers that they want to locate in sometimes master plan communities or suburbs, because instead of like getting a coffee on your way to work, you might just be at home and squeeze in a coffee break that you want to walk 5 minutes to. So I'm curious how the changing kind of remote work patterns are impacting how you see your residents and the communities you work with. How is that changing how they interact with those communities?
Yeah, I think it depends where regionally you're looking at it, and if it's in a concentrated city. So take California for instance. You see in the headlines that there's been this exodus of residents moving out, but also who's following that. It's the corporations and the corporate relocations, and they're establishing a presence in at least what we're seeing in our master plan communities. And we've been a big beneficiary of it, and it's because it has that sense of the walkability, the live, work, play, and people can come to these communities and they can have a more affordable lifestyle while still being afforded the same career opportunities. And so if you see this talent pool that's been heading out of the coastal markets, companies are taking notice because they need to hire these people. And there's already a lot of labor constraints that we're seeing more broadly in today's market. And so I think having that office presence where people can come in, even if it's hybrid for now, we're starting to see people come back more and more. But I think, as you mentioned, to the retail component and having those tenants that offer an experience, we're seeing that come into play. And one of the tenants that we've seen a lot, especially here in our community, it's about 7 miles away of Summerlin, we own 1 million square feet. We've seen a lot of tenants who were strictly e-commerce coming into the market and wanting to establish a brick and mortar presence because they want to get in front of that consumer, but they want to do it in a location where those consumers actually are.
Was this a Casper?
Yes, yeah. So that was one example. So Casper Mattress, they were fully online during the pandemic. I guess right around the end of 2020, they wanted to have that presence. And we've seen that with several others where we've had retailers that were maybe more legacy and kind of dying out. They've been replaced with some of these e-commerce tenants. And we've seen an uptick in foot traffic in downtown Summerlin over the last year of 20 million plus visitors. That's more than Disneyland. So we've seen a huge emergence coming back in the space.
The increased traffic is 20 million up?
So a total of 20 million visitors have come to downtown Summerlin, just to the retail component over the last year.
So are you saying Summerlin's cooler than
I mean, you said that.
Okay, I guess I definitely have to check it out.
Yeah, I think the impact of remote work is a fascinating topic because I think you have to look at it in a really nuanced way, and there's all kinds of research from major universities that really point to hybrid work as being here to stay and something that's ultimately going to be the model going forward. I think, the days of, you could work anywhere and you decide to leave San Francisco and you go to Boise and you work remotely and then you end up being the first person to be laid off of your tech job. We're definitely seeing people, flying away from downtown cores. That's without a doubt. I think office buildings are inadequate for the changing nature of work. But what we are seeing is, at least in California, those communities, and I think Summerlin's an excellent example, but like Irvine, that have the infrastructure to offer, yes, a great quality of life, incredible open space, top 40 university, but it also has an ecosystem of suppliers, spin-offs, and newcomers. In that case, in the tech space, it's in the top 5 in tech in California. And what has happened is they have a tax surplus per person of $54,000, which is the highest of any tech hub in America, and incredibly high jobs to residence ratio. So what's happening is people are yes, leaving urban centers, but they're moving to these great lifestyle centers that have an ecosystem of jobs in case they lose their job. They have other options, and they can meet people in their communities around them. So I think that's really important, and I think towns like Summerlin are great examples of what people are really preferring. Great quality of life, but also an ecosystem of jobs where you have options, and you can meet like-minded people and network.
So in some ways, it's providing an economic engine, so these master plan communities aren't just a place you live, it's also a place you can work, and it can truly exist on its own as a mini city.
Yeah, even the Dallas examples, you just have a tremendous employer along major corridors that make all these new communities really work, I would argue. So you need both.
So even with hybrid work, you're saying there's still a need for some sort of office presence?
Yeah, you need a knowledge base.
Communities.
You need major universities. You need technical knowledge in order to attract the best and brightest.
Yeah, and I think that it was so easy to say, we can work from anywhere, but as you said, it's not always the case, and so I think that it still needs to have some sort of connection to some sort of employment, just to be somewhat close. But at the same time, I think that the hybrid remote work trend did make it possible for people to be a little bit more okay with living in suburbs or exurbs, which helps also with affordability. And so I wanted to ask about, we're seeing, obviously we're in a higher mortgage rate environment, affordability is an ongoing concern. So what do you see in terms of how the communities that you work with are kind of trying to address affordability concerns? I know that you talked about diversity of housing stock. We see a lot more single-family rentals. There's a community that Howard Hughes has in the Houston area called Bridgeland that is doing some single-family rentals. So could you just kind of talk about how you're trying to address, or how you see your master plan community clients trying to tackle this affordability issue?
For us, our clients have been putting some of everything in. So a community like Harvest has single family for rent, it has apartments that are slated to be part of the
Where's
project.
Service?
It's north of Fort Worth. It has homes in it that are single family for rent, it has townhomes, it has detached homes, varying varieties of price points as well as square footages, and really trying to address a community's needs. And most of our master plan communities that we're working on are approaching it with that. Not a one-size-fits-all, but a multi-size-fits-more.
A variety of housing types.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly, I would echo that. For us, it's really casting a wide net. And in our communities, we have home prices starting out for that beginning entry-level home buyer all the way up to the big millions. And so we have something for everybody. And in doing that, I mean, everybody's at a different stage in their life cycle, and everybody has different affordability metrics that that they have as far as homes go. And so having a diversity of product brings in a diverse amount of people into the community. But I think, especially what we're seeing today, goes back to economics 101 and just supply and demand. And what we've seen is this massive imbalance where there's a little supply still today and still very strong demand. And over the last 50 years, we have been, well, really since 2008, we've had this great fall off in new home completions. And so we've been under 1 million units a year across the country up until 2022. And meanwhile, we have new household formation across the country, about 1 million households per year. And so if you look at the data, and it basically implies that we're about 4 million housing units short today across the country.
Does that include multifamily?
Yeah, so multifamily, so it's all residential. But it just shows that there's this wide gap, and we have a lot of work to do to catch up on that. And then you factor in things like interest rates and affordability. And I think that when that happens and you have these spikes that hinders affordability, what we've seen is they take a pause. And they don't say, well, no, I'm not going to buy a home anymore. They just say, okay, well, let me see where the market kind of settles out. Maybe they have to step down from the $500,000 home to the $450,000, or as we were saying earlier, maybe instead of a 4-bedroom, it's a 3-bedroom to adjust. But they still need to buy that home. And so for us, it's offering that affordability across a wide range so that everyone can get that home that they need.
But I would also argue that this diversity of product, this connection to open space, the walkability, all of the things we're talking about is building community. And it's what really builds a lasting, more sustainable community, because it's not based on one product type or one type of buyer. It's really built almost like the communities that organically grew at a much slower approach. And the other thing that bringing on all of those different products, selling to and marketing to multiple people, it helps the developer burn through that land quicker, get out from under the note that he's carrying on that land, so that the project becomes more profitable, so that they can move on to the next project sooner, quicker.
So I'm kind of curious, with some of the projects you've worked on the West Coast, I mean, I guess like I just associate California as like, my sister-in-law's like paid over $800,000 for a 1970s townhome in Pasadena. Like people just can't afford places. So I'm kind of curious, what role are master plan communities in sort of addressing the need for affordable housing?
Well, a couple thoughts about that. One observation in California is there's a missing middle scale of development, which is by far going to get you the most density and the most affordability, which is that 5 to 7 story product that we all love when we go to see, when we go to Paris or London, and it's that very walkable block structure that creates an incredibly dense blocks that have the eyes on the street and so on. I also think that there's a real misconception in California about affordability and actually Tom Cox and Kelly Farrell, who are going to be talking the next session, are experts on this. But you know, the most sophisticated cities integrate affordable housing into their luxury product as a percentage. So you go to Chicago, high-rise residential has, you know, some affordable product built into it as required as required by the entitlement, which is really important because it's basically seamless. It's integrated into every housing product, which is really I would argue the sophisticated way to do it, as opposed to that's the affordable product.
Well, I think there's also challenges to that. Just
Yeah.
before this, Robert, you were talking about there was a community that was kind of pushing back against having single-family rentals, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, we often see some of the suburban towns, communities around their major cities that will push back on single-family for rent, they'll push back on multifamily. And some of the single-family for rent that they're pushing back on, they're pushing back because some of the early people out the gate built what most find just unpleasant product. It was a sort of a behind the gate apartment community that's just horizontal, just a horizontal apartment community. And it really has caused the industry to have a little bit of a stub toe as they try to market to other towns.
One other thing about that, that's particular to California's progressive politics, that I think is a harbinger of what might happen across the country, is they have something in California law called the Surplus Land Act, which is any municipality land that is owned that they want to dispose of or sell, they have to shop it around to affordable housing developers first. And they have the right of first refusal, which interestingly has created a chilling effect of municipalities wanting to sell its property, basically holding on to it, because their communities don't want a preponderance of affordability. So it's a little irony to our state laws, but so it's incredibly complex in California, and you know, we definitely have a real housing shortage that isn't getting any better anytime soon.
So how do you go about putting in affordable type of products or attainable, even if it's not capital affordable, attainably priced products in a master plan community in a way that actually feels like natural and not just like, you know, here's a few token poor people or something, you know?
Well, you definitely, you can always, not, you know, 10 times out of 10, you can identify the affordable housing component of a project if you really look carefully. The way to do it well, and these gentlemen I'm sure do it very well, is, you know, you share open spaces, you integrate that product so that the scale is similar to other higher quality pieces, but you know, at the end of the day, it comes down to finishes and quality of windows and that sort of thing, and you can tell, but the scale, if you're not looking carefully or looking out for it, it's totally integrated. But I wouldn't say that America is in an incredibly sophisticated place about affordable housing right now.
Yeah. I know that there's been a, you know, with this diversity of housing types, we'll, you know, potentially see an increasing diversity in master plan communities. I mean, it sounds like that's kind of already taking place. So I'm curious, like, what are you seeing in terms of the demographic shifts in your communities? We have a few things happening. You know, we have more people interested possibly in living in these communities who maybe previously lived in their urban core, so people kind of moving out. And then we also have, of course, the Sunbelt migration, which, you know, in Texas, that's in Nevada, you know, it's really, really impacted us. So what are you seeing in terms of the demographic shifts that are happening in your communities now, and how is that kind of changing the character of your communities and how you go about planning?
So I think for us, what we're seeing is that all of our communities, we do have a ton of diversity, but when we look at it, what we're seeing overall is that our communities are growing faster in population. They're getting smarter and more educated. relative to their surrounding metro regions and across the U.S. more broadly. And so a good example is in the Woodlands. So we're just north of Houston. We've seen the average age of our resident remain flat for essentially the last 12 years. Meanwhile, Houston and the U.S. more broadly is getting older. And so when I first saw that stat, I said, okay, well, people in the Woodlands are just having a lot more kids. And in fact, the average household size has stayed pretty flat as well. And so what that means is that younger people are coming into the community, they're well educated, just as we were touching on earlier, to have a job hub and have companies here with an office presence is huge. And so younger, more educated people in our communities, that's the workforce. That's people who want these jobs, and the companies are there. And so in the Woodlands, just sticking with that, there's 1.5 jobs per rooftop, and there's more people that commute into the Woodlands than out of it for work. And so I think that that having those companies plays a big part of it, and is why we see the demographics as they are.
Schools and education play a huge role in master plan communities as well, to the point that sometimes the developer will donate land for that
Because they just want to have the school
because
there.
they want that first elementary school. They may even help seed some sort of school if they need a private school within that community to get that school, to get that walkable place for you to take your child as far as an elementary school. And they even in a bad school district, and put bad in quotes, that once you have a school in your master plan community where your residents are the people who are feeding that school as well as mentoring everyone around it, that school typically elevates that school district. So it's usually a good thing for not only the community, but the greater community as well, to have those schools within those master plan communities.
And I think with the increase of younger families, as you mentioned, it's just part of the general population growth that a lot of these master plan communities are talking about. And this is like, all of these, how many, Summerlin has like 100,000
Yeah,
residents?
100,000.
Yeah, so these are like legit.
Yeah, Woodlands, 120,000.
So, with that, that's putting more strain on a lot of the resources in these communities. And, in Nevada and Arizona, it's more about water management. In Houston, it's like, we have too much water, and risking, managing flood risk. So what are you seeing in terms of sort of creative solutions in the communities you work with, creative solutions to managing resources?
Looking at me. Okay. Well, I think that a couple things. Master plan communities have done well, are incredibly diverse ethnically, but educationally are not particularly diverse usually. They're quite well educated. People are willing to pay for quality. So that applies to schools, that applies to infrastructure, 5G, that applies to environmental strategies. So, in projects that we're working on regularly, there are purple pipe systems and solar arrays on rooftops and incentives for EV charging and mobility incentives for first and last mile and so on that are just part and parcel of what the community expects. But it's usually an education thing, certain a level of attainment that demands those kinds of considerations. Food production is huge. Vertical farming and agri-goods are really important to a lot of the communities we work in. And so it's a layered approach, and if you don't have a number of initiatives, sometimes a dozen or more initiatives that are focused on carbon footprint and really behavior modeling that allows people to really feel good about the community they're living in, then you're just another community. Especially in a place like California where environmental concerns are top of mind. Regardless of political persuasion, environmental initiatives almost always pass in California statewide and also locally.
Yeah.
And we have a project in development in Texas called Coal Ranch that the developer is creating some water company that will actually manage all of the water of the open spaces, amenity spaces, as well as the water of the individual home residents. So all of that will be managed within that one company. That same project, we're really trying to turn the open space infrastructure into amenities. So if you can have that runoff water just run across some open space and green space before it gets into the water system, it has 90% of those impurities will be pulled out of that water before it gets into the creeks and systems. That's the same project that I had told you about, that there is a highway that's planned by the local transportation plan, and that highway is going to go through an area where there's some really great trees, so that developer is taking it upon himself to stockpile those trees in their own tree farm. And all of those trees, so far we've dug 150 trees that will be used in phase 1, and those trees all have an 8-foot root ball on them. So it's a pretty substantial tree that will be sprinkled throughout phase 1.
And I'll touch on this last point. I think it's also knowing your environment. So we all develop around the country. Those climates are completely different. Houston and Vegas in particular, pretty drastic. They are not the same. But since we are here in Vegas, water is a pretty big issue, and I think that there's a lot of new techniques and a lot of new technologies to make sure that water conservation is at the forefront. And just here in southern Nevada, over the last decade, the population has increased by almost 50%. Water consumption per capita is down almost 50% over the same time period. And it's because of the integration of all these new technologies and it being top of mind. And our community of Summerlin here in Vegas, we've taken a similar approach to say, we want to remove a lot of the green grass area around here. And so we've moved over the last couple of years close to 9 acres of grass, which saves over 20 million gallons of water a year. And so it's making sure that we have drought-tolerant landscaping, but that it also looks great and it goes with the community, and it really makes it a part of that natural environment.
And the grass is being replaced by like some kind of desert?
So like the desert-tolerant landscaping and plants that don't really require much water, and even so we sell land to home builders, and those home builders will build homes. We have parameters with those home builders to say, hey, in Summerlin, you can't have a luscious green grass front yard. We have certain parameters that they have to follow so that it's suitable for the environment.
And another point on kind of like resource management and trees, you had an interesting project I wanted you to talk about with falling goods.
So we have a project in McKinney, Texas that is really aspiring to be different from the beginning. And one of its design features is to really make everyone feel as though their home is the trailhead within that home. So as you step out the door, you're stepping onto the trails of the community, or sidewalks that lead to the trails, lead to the open space. But this particular developer for Pantry was really wanting to be different from the beginning all the way through the process. The developer is a landscape architect turned developer. And so to do some of the early clearing, they brought in goats and turned them loose so that they could actually get in and survey. Goats will eat the underbrush, including poison ivy, without harming the goat. And and clean it out and get it to where you can see what trees are there to be preserved and retained.
Pretty cool, and I think that's part of, I can't remember if Robert, you were mentioned this, or some other folk, or me or John, but kind of like integrating this, the approach to sustainability into like sort of the story of your community, or like marketing.
Well, certainly, I think that project has certainly done a great job of bringing it in as part of its marketing package, or at least tooting its own horn to let people know what they're doing. But I think as we talk about the buyers being about experience, part of the experience is the story of the place and understanding why that community versus another community. And there is ultimately you have to appeal to them as to why you want to bring them into Summerlin or you want to bring them into any of the other communities. And all of those items help build that story for them to make that sale. But for you to get excited about being part of a place that really was thinking through the sustainable things to the point that they might have had goats. And they may even keep a small goat farm on site, post that to be part of telling that story.
As long as I can see a baby goat. There. Were you going to say something?
No, I was going to say, we're working on Circle T Ranch with Millwood, and it basically the sales pitch is we're preserving the natural environment and stewarding the environment. Yes, there's commercial development happening and residential and so on, but a huge amount of the land, 60%, I believe, is set aside just as natural, stewarded open space in perpetuity. So the real sales pitch is kind of, we're preserving what's already here, making it more accessible to the community.
And I just real quick, I think that by doing that, it shows a resident or a tenant coming into the community that you're doing it because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And you're not doing it just to check a box. You're doing it because this is the right thing to do for the environment, for the community, and it also shows that you're here for the long term. You're not here, for a year or two. You're going to crank out a lot of development and leave. I mean, these communities, people can essentially live their whole lives in there, so they want to know that it will be there for the long term. So if you take that long-term, thoughtful approach, all the better for that resident to live there.
Yeah, in some ways it seems like that kind of it would appeal to a lot of the younger families or the millennials who want to make the, whatever, socially conscious choice if they can, if they're buying a new home, right? And I think we've talked about part of that too is just there's sort of a hipsterization of the suburbs that have been happening, where like there's one community in Houston that rebranded Springwoods Village, is where Exxon has its campus, rebranded itself as City Place. It's nowhere, like it doesn't look like it's not like downtown, but that's kind of the idea is that we have everything that you would maybe get in a downtown. So I don't know if you're seeing kind of that thought process go into like your planning at all, if you're thinking about like trying to have more like cool things that would like kind of make it feel like more urban-like. Or is it just kind of like, okay, we always know we're going to be a suburb, we're just about quality of life and having...
Yeah, we're definitely seeing that, and we recently brought Kirby Ice House to Houston, and now it's the longest bar in Texas. So
it's like a vibey beer place.
Yeah.
I think people don't know what Ice Houses are, but they're like a...
Yeah, you go grab a beer, go watch the game. So for us, there was a parking lot that was sitting vacant for years, and it was just spillover parking for a mall. Throughout the pandemic, the consumer wanting that experience, and the more residents that we had in our community, we saw it as a great opportunity to take that parking lot and really transform it into Kirby's Ice House. But then it really activated one city block, because right across from there you have Market Street, which is a big retail center with fine dining and retail. And then across the street from that, you have the Cynthia Woods Pavilion, which is one of the country's best concert venues. And so within one block now, you can spend a whole day in our community where you can go and watch the game, grab a drink at the Ice House. After that, you can go across the street and grab dinner. And then after that, you can go and watch a concert. And hey, if you're a resident, you also have a pretty short commute on the way home. So I think that by integrating that throughout all of our communities has been very beneficial.
And the Woodlands has been developing for quite some
Yeah,
time.
we're year number 50.
Year number 50. So a lot of the communities that we're working on right now are 3,000, 5,000, 7,000, 10,000 acres. So they have every opportunity to have a Woodlands-like experience of all of that retail. So as planners, we are planning and looking at what that can be or what that will be. It takes several years before that town center aspect of it is added into the communities. But if you look at most of these large master plan communities, there is a town center component, an urban center component that is planned in most of them. A lot of them even include some industrial property as well.
So we have a time for like 1 or 2 questions if anyone has. Anything you want to ask?
I just wanted to ask about that social capital. It's something that's been, for example, when I brought over into Portland, and that's like been measured to be in decline in the U.S., and especially during COVID, was something that was brought to attention. So I'm wondering how, with master plan communities especially, you can basically design to increase social capital.
Did you say that their source of capital?
Social capital.
Social.
I think with if you're working with a client that is really designing for a mix of housing types, a mix of buyer profiles, you're going to have the best opportunity there to have a project that is going to have sort of that shared social capital within it. We strongly seek out, our firm seeks out those developers who are focused on that type of community and try to work with them as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think for us, it's also having programs in place that kind of meet to that. So, we have a day where we hand out seeds that will start a tree, and so residents can come by and get that. Or in our community of Bridgeland, we'll work with the home builders and donate a home to a veteran who's going to live in that community. And so by doing that and by targeting our donations in the right spot, I think that can be effective in doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and personally, I just think there's so much about our lifestyle that really alienates us from each other, and I don't think that always used to be the case. Like in World War II, America grew something like 25 or 30% of its vegetables at home. And so I honestly think that we always talk so much about experience, but I don't think it's enough. I think Americans in suburban contexts are incredibly bored, and they need something else. And a lot of times with the best communities that I've worked in, they're focused on art and creativity, they're focused on learning, they're focused on pro bono work, incubation of new businesses. So experience, like, that's good, but what people really want is they want to connect. And so it's a little bit harder to do, but the best communities like Playa Vista, for example, has it closed this retail space, and basically it's all for local businesses, and they have like a pop-up there, and we're seeing more and more of that. So I think that's the holy grail of these places, is how do you create connections.
All right, so that wraps up our panel discussion today. Thank you so much for your time and insight. Appreciate it. And so interesting to see where it's all going with master plan communities and kind of how it's providing affordable housing to now an increasing number of diverse people. So thank you too for listening. Appreciate it.
Thank you.